All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Nik McRae, tell me a little bit about you and your journey, how you found yourself as a practitioner of sorts.
Found myself as a practitioner. Yeah, I would say kicking and screaming was the majority of the process, as healing goes. But basically, in a nutshell, how this all started off was my grandmother was really sick, and so she started to see a naturopathic doctor who got her put on all sorts of supplements and stuff, but essentially made the point that until you heal existential and childhood trauma and really overcome certain patterns of thought and feeling within you, you're never going to get rid of the physical ailments that you're experiencing, even with all of the medical help. So that kind of launched my mom to work with her on this whole process of learning psychic and metaphysical modalities, healing work, energetic work, basically like the whole esoteric arts. So I was basically raised in that process as they were going through it. And throughout my own journey of kind of resenting it and embracing it, over time it just became clear that this is the only way forward for me. And so that lended me to want to embrace it for myself and find where I can stake my own claim in it.
So ahead of then, had your grandmother tried conventional support and wasn't
Oh,
pregnant?
yeah, she tried everything, but we're talking like the 80s and 90s where it was fairly rudimentary at that point, like working with the systems of the body. It was a little bit more homogenized in the experience that she was facing. So with all of that, like it became a little bit more of a self study and seeking out people that were trained in these different modalities to find an alternative route. And so that kind of led my mom to want to try everything because if the things that were being enforced weren't working and the things that were being suppressed were, then she really took it upon herself to bring this to the people. And of course, I was along for that ride.
Right, because when she found it worked, then she thought everybody needs to know about this, and it needs to not be as I don't know, off limits, I guess, or just mysterious.
Yeah, not so taboo and misconstrued. There's a lot of it that is given a certain level of ridicule to a certain degree and is not always taken so seriously when we're looking through a left brain logical lens because the emotional, energetic side of things really just aren't studied to that degree that they are with the physical realms of the world. So essentially, it was like if no one's going to show you the way, you've got to find it yourself. And in finding it yourself, pave the way for others as well.
Yeah, I mean, tell me then, what was your hesitation? Did it just not make sense logically, or
Yeah, partially that it didn't make sense logically, and I think another part of it that everyone who's obstinate feels is there's something to it that I don't understand. There's nothing my logical brain can latch onto as far as, reason. And so our immediate response to that, whether consciously or not, is fear and apprehension because we can see that this is something that can make a change in our life, but we're not sure if we're either ready for that change or if we want that change or if we're going to be able to control that change. And so I think that's where the obstinance comes from is just the unknown of it and wanting to kind of keep yourself protected from a Pandora's box you can't close again.
well, now that you're in this box willingly by choice, and you're finding maybe more of what you were looking for and a support to help yourself and others, what would you want to tell anybody out there who was maybe coming across this for the first time?
Truthfully, just keep an open heart when it comes to these things and an open mind because for me personally, I'm an eternal skeptic and I will always be skeptical of everything until it proves itself to me. And with things like astrology, esoteric work, human design, energetic work, over these years, it's proven itself time and time and time and time again. So, me being the proper skeptic that I am, if it keeps proving itself over and over again, then there's really nothing for me to be obstinate towards. And at that point, if it's proving itself, I want to explore it more fully and I want to get more of other people's perspectives and studies and the work that they've done with things to give myself a broader perspective. So for people coming into this for the first time, I would say first and foremost, don't let anyone decide for you what any of this is supposed to bring to you. Have your own version of self discovery and exploration. And at the end of the day, all of this entire world is just about introspection and growth. So if you're willing to do that via any format, then I'd say open mindedness is always the key.
Yeah, well said. Would you say to that point that you'd encourage people to sort of find a guide a practitioner, someone experienced to help lead them, or that they might just go ahead on their own and sort of dive in?
I would say it's a healthy combination of both. The main reason being that you don't know at first who's credible and who isn't. And that's a process of self-discovery that involves trusting your intuitive feeling on something. If you have someone reach out to you and you don't get a good feeling about it, then even though it might sound great, you probably shouldn't go for it. Whereas if you see a post from someone or someone refers you to someone and you feel a good vibe around it, well, maybe go try it out and see what it brings you. But with that open-mindedness also comes a certain level of a boundary. Like, don't give your power away to people believing they have the answers that you don't or that you can't come to yourself. So I would say it's a healthy combination of resonating with certain people that will fit for you and following that exploratory feeling, as well as taking it upon yourself to contemplate and bring introspection to your own self study, because practitioners will give you context and tools and support, but they won't be able to do the work for you, nor will they able to be your support system for you. So you've got to cultivate your own support systems and your own truths with the support of people that you trust.
Yes. What are you doing to be that option of support for people? Is it your preference to do one-on-one? I know you're making material, you're teaching other people, all that you've come to understand.
I truly prefer one-on-one. If I could just continue to do one-on-one sessions all the time, I would. I just realize that's not the greatest way to reach everybody, and some people aren't looking for that intimate setting either. So when it comes to working within groups, like when I teach my classes for the astrology school, or if I'm doing workshops or trade shows, that's all great. But for myself personally, I find the most fulfillment in one-on-one work because it's the most intimate and because people tend to be a little bit more open and vulnerable. And then I can give my full focus and attention as opposed to giving them bits and pieces of something in order to give everyone the same amount.
Absolutely. Well, so tell me then, what you're doing in your one-on-ones. How do you define that or explain it?
Well, basically, what I do is I'll get your astrological and human design charts as a frame of reference as to how you work fundamentally through the frame of reference of these systems, as well as what sort of cycles you're in existentially. Because no matter whether you subscribe to the belief of astrology or not, between the ages of 28 and 30, no matter where you were born and no matter when you were born, Saturn's going to be back to where it was when you were born. So we can see this as sort of a clock to mark what sort of transformational shifts that we're in and what cycle of our lifetime that we're in. So I'll get these charts to get an idea of how you work, what sort of cycles you're in, and that also gives me a frame of reference as to how to relay information to you, because everybody um, embraces and integrates wisdom and information differently depending on how you work as a person. So I also try and custom suit the way I deliver the information to your design specifically. So to break that all down, I'll get all your information, I'll get an idea of where you're coming from, and then we just sit down and have a conversation. Basically, just tuning into what sort of patterns or perspectives are limiting you and what sort of things I'm seeing in the charts that might be constructive for you to understand. Basically, sharing all these perspectives and insights is the energy work that we're doing. And then further down the road, as you start to have experiences that relate to what we discussed, that's when the wisdom will start to sink in, and that's where the continued work really begins.
Yeah, and I remember when we did, or you did a session for me, and it was recorded. Uh, it's useful for me to have that sort of tagged in time to reference back to later. Do you think people should do some pre-work before coming to work with you?
No, I don't think so. I actually really enjoy doing sessions for people who've never had any experience with metaphysics or astrology or anything whatsoever, because they're usually more open-minded. They don't have a bias or a preconceived notion as to what they're supposed to get from it. They also don't have an expectation about what I'm supposed to bring to them. So the self work, of course, I would say is something that everyone should do, and you can do any prep work before you see me. But what's more important is after you see me that you listen to the recording, because in the first part of the session where we're sitting with one another on the call, that's all the energy work. I don't want you to try and remember every word that we said. I'm just giving you as much bang for your buck as I can. And then a couple weeks after the session, listening to the recording is the other half of what you paid for. Because once you listen to the recording, you're going to get so much of the information and context that relates to what happened after the session. So that would be my advice to people, is you don't need to do any sort of prep. You just need to really commit yourself to the work after the session, and then you'll get the most out of it.
I love that. Yeah, just show up as you are. And
Yeah, and just be open.
mhm. And do you have people asking you, a lot of questions about their astrology? Because when I first learned that astrology was not generalized like we consider when we see our horoscopes, but it's actually individual. No person ever, not even your twin, has your specific star chart. Do people ask you a lot about it?
To a degree, yeah, and identical twins will have damn near the same chart, like just because of the proximity to each other in terms of their birth time. But the thing with everyone and their expression of their birth chart is the birth chart is just the loadout. It's like if you were playing a video game like an RPG, you would pick your certain character traits. So even if you come into the same world with the same traits as someone else, you will express them differently through their free will. So, one of the things I try and emphasize to people when they're learning about astrology and human design or any of these other modalities, that they're just lenses. That's all they are. They're a certain frame of reference to perceive yourself and your free will through. And so I always try and put the ball in everyone else's court that this chart isn't governing your life and who you are as a person. This is just an indication as to what you're here and what you're working with and what you're here with and what you're working for. And then from there, we can start to identify how you want to do that personally within your own, sense of self.
Yeah, I wish that, from you describing that, the kids were using it, or particularly like you're saying, 28 to 30, that Saturn's return time when people can feel um, sort of a big pressure of making a definition of who they are and what their purpose is.
Yeah, and that's why I think there's a pro and a con to learning this stuff. The pro would be that you get all of this different context to help work with each other through. Like when me and my mom found out that I was a manifester and she was a projector in human design, and the nuances of how those auras connect, that taught us a whole lot about where our dissonance was coming from and how we can learn to work with one another. So that's a really strong bonus. And then you can also see maybe when a kid goes into school, well, their Mercury is in retrograde and they're born with Mercury in Pisces. They're going to learn things through impressions and they're not going to learn through sequence. So giving them the information based on how they learn it could be really constructive. But now on the other side of this, if people start predisposing someone based on their chart or start creating limitations for who you are based on your chart or start creating some sort of bias based on a chart, well, now that's disempowering because if people believe that this chart is the fate they must adhere to rather than the tools they're working with, well, then it is a limiting thing and they'll try and limit themselves to their chart. And that's where our not self conditioning is important to look at because if we convince ourselves of something based on a chart and it turns out not to be true, well, then the chart isn't what limited us. It was like us that limited us. And I just want to bring that awareness to people, not to see the charts and the modalities as the be all end all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in my realm of hypnosis, it's all about what you create for yourself. And so when you recognize you are the creator, why limit yourself in any way? Those chart indicators can just be a useful guide. But I'd heard it said that any chart can have any story, and any two charts can have any sort of story. Do you do synergy work? Do you help people learn the ways of their charts working together?
Yeah, yeah, I do synastry and composite charts and all that. And I've done like counseling for people as far as, relationship, marriage. I've helped people book their weddings. Like I've done lots of that kind of stuff. And it's all really great in its own way, to have the charts and to be able to work with it in that way. But at the end of the day, I just want everyone to know that they are free to choose what they want to choose and do what they want to do. And that's something I always try and emphasize in relationships as well, is that freedom to be yourself is the most important part of a relationship. And so, no matter how you interact as far as synastry goes, you also got to keep in mind you have your own conditionings and traumas and childhood experiences that are going to be playing through that. So, once again, never judge a book by its cover.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the astrology, whether or not you're conscious to it, so it's
Yeah.
you.
And it's just something that is, again, it's really helpful for people to understand some nuances of how we interact, but it's not meant to define who we are. And that's the danger people will fall into if they let it be the be all end all, is they start to live their life around their chart instead of like living their chart around their life.
Oh, I want that T-shirt with a good cool
So
astrology. Yeah.
it's all yours. Coin it
Yeah.
away.
Well, you're the artist. I know you're teaching people astrology. Um, you're putting this into very accessible, demystified context so that people are empowered. I mean, this is, what the oldest science. It's not it's not just a generalized weekly horoscope. It's a real way of looking at the potential of energy that you've computed into this vessel.
Yeah, and there's tons of different kinds too. There's Vedic and sidereal and, Chinese astrology. There's tropical astrology, which is what I use. So with all of the varieties of the charts and everything as well, it's important to keep in mind that like these are all something for you to work with and grow from. But there's also differences between all of them, which is why for myself personally, I try not to refer to astrology as a science in the way that I use it, because I know in the Eastern world there's a lot more of a scientific method to the way they use their astrology. But for me, I truly consider it an art form, a sort of an instrument or a way of expressing myself, because you can get 10 different readings from 10 different people on the same chart, and they'll all have similar themes, but they'll all be very different as far as the perspective and the way they're interpreted. And to me, that's a lot more artistic than it is scientific, because there isn't a repeatable, consistent, same for everyone method like the science would lean towards. It's more every person's interpretation of what this thing is speaking to them. And so that's where your creativity is a really important part of it, because not only do you want to make the textbook information accessible and digestible, but you also want to make this creative and personable enough that someone is impacted by it and they start to get the vision of themselves in their mind. And so that's where I also always consider myself an artist first and foremost. And that's why I also try to lean away from trying to convince people that astrology works, because I want them to find that on their own. I train people how to read astrology charts. I train people how to teach astrology. And so, really, just however you want to use it for you is how I want you to use it for you. And that's why I love the art, because it makes it so much more open and accessible.
Yeah, and how would you teach art? It's really just about inspiring the confidence and giving people permission that it's subjective. You've got unlimited reins as to how you would want someone to integrate um, this information.
Yeah, and just like art, there are fundamentals that you want to follow for a good reading. Just like, you can be a professionally trained artist and you're just going to know all those little techniques that give you the edge on someone who's just naturally talented, right, at painting or something. So that's also where like your own training and ability to use the fundamentals is a way of expressing yourself. Um, really does show people, how can I word this properly? Really does show who's made it their own and has really created a profound way of delivering the astrology or the human design or whatever it might be, based on how they've imbued their own personality, experience, and artistry into the fundamentals.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you would think now, with the current time we're in, the current state of, let's say, distress or opportunity that people feel, like any sort of like more time urgent message that you could want to get across for people considering the unconventional realms of options?
Well, just everyone keep in mind, we're moving into an unprecedented time in human history when we're actually able to shift out of a state of survive into a state of thrive. And the fundamental basis of that is healing of trauma to create peace. And then, as another part of that, really understanding each other, like not needing to be the same in order to be understood. Because in order for us to move into this new paradigm of thrive, we need to unify. And what we've been going through this last few years is Saturn making its transit through Aquarius, which means freedom is what's being challenged right now. Freedom, sovereignty, independence. This is also a new generation's coming of age. The millennials are starting to move into the positions of power, and that's not happening in a very smooth and cohesive way due to the nature of millennials being born with Pluto and Scorpio. It's about exposing corruption and depravity. It's about facing the darkness and the traumas of society. It's about liberating sexual trauma and bringing healing to all of that. So, all of these really dark things we're facing in the world right now are just the festering coming out of the wound. And it's a necessary part of this healing, because at the end of all of this, if I were to stay optimistic, I would say what we're looking at is unity. And that's something that's been kept from us, for a long time, whether it be through ruling bodies or whether it be through our own dissonance. But now that the whole world's gone through a collective trauma together, I believe the whole world can go through a collective healing together. And that's what I'm seeing happening in my day to day,
Yeah.
no matter how heavy it is for all of us individually.
And is that's the time that we're in, what you're saying right now, like it's already open?
We're in it. It's been happening. That's why our freedom is being challenged, because this is the chance for humanity to claim it truly, the freedom of our consciousness.
Amazing. Well, I'm so excited for people to be connected to you, to take your skeptic approved approach at using these options and getting answers if anybody's out there seeking any answers, or any sense of guidance or permission to become their own sense of power and source guidedness.
Yeah, and if there's anything I would really want to share from my own life that's been one of the most important things of embracing this whole, dare I say, spiritual realm as a part of my vocation is don't feel like you have to adhere to any sort of way of doing that either. You can still be your cool punk, outgoing self. You can still live in the truth of your expression and authenticity and still be the love and the light. And with that love and light, you can also be the shadow and truth, as one of my mentors, Carissa Schumacher, always says. So I want everyone to know that there's no sort of aesthetic or certain thing that you have to adhere to in order to bring this into your life. You just have to embrace it as a quality of self, not as a sort of a persona. And then you'll be a lot more free to be yourself and to embrace all these modalities. And that's just something I wanted to really prioritize as a message, because so many people get caught in the theme of spirituality that they miss the core of, like, this isn't just an aesthetic or a lifestyle. Like, this is a truth about yourself that you're choosing to embrace, and once you open that box, you're not going to be able to close it. But why would you want to close the box that's creating your growth and healing and momentum? So even though it feels heavy, just be yourself and just do the work. And I promise you that it'll all be worth your while. You'll feel better than you ever have.
It's energy, be the change. And I love what you'd said about unprecedented times, because it's so exciting. It hasn't existed yet, and collectively we're creating it. And
So that's my final, I guess, message that I would like to give is just focus on unity in any way, shape, or form. You facing your own biases and your own, judgments about yourself in the world is where this healing has got to take place. Adamantly fighting your position on your soapbox is a futile effort, and it's something I run into every day in myself. Is it's not what I'm saying that's going to make any sort of difference, it's who I'm being. And if we can all take that healing to our own personal agenda in our own personal lives, then that unity will be inevitable. So I just hope that people can see past their own anger and fury and sadness and fear, and really just focus on loving each other, and that really just starts with loving yourself. And I think that that's what these modalities are the best for, is bringing that love into your awareness.
yeah, well said, Nik McRae. Thank you so much, so much. Any last message, or I'll tell people where to find you, Nik McRae, Beyond Ironic.
Yeah, so the website will be launched pretty soon. It should be by the end of March, beyondironic.com. You can also reach me at beyondironic@gmail.com, or you can look me up, Nik McRae, on social media.
All right. Well, Nik McRae, astrologer, human design, intuitive, um, plus more. Thank you
Plus
for,
more.
yeah, for all the great talk today.
Thank
Really,
you as well, Lauren. I really appreciate the time.
yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody.